as the sun was setting o'er the bright May meadows of Shelmalier, a rebel hand set the heather blazing and brought the neighbours from far and near. Then Father Murphy from old Kilcormac spurned up the rocks with a warning cry. Arm, arm, he cried, for I've come to lead you for Ireland's freedom. We fight or die. He led us on against the coming soldiers and the cowardly yeomen. We put to flight. 'Twas at the Barrow the boys of Wexford showed Bucky's regiment how men could fight. Look out for hirelings, King George of England. Yeah.
Dress to the right! Dress!
Of course, it's pure Irish, Canuck Yonagair, which means the hill of the wood of the berries. In modern parlance, you might call it Woodbury Hill. And you can see how settlers coming into Ireland, they knew the word Canuck because they met it almost everywhere, and that meant hill. But they didn't know what Vinegar was. So Vinegar, 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 it became vinegar. One of the things that had happened in Ireland at this stage was that the organs of the state, in the imposition of the law, had become totally lawless themselves. The people were now afraid of the law. Several different novel torments were invented. One of being the pitch cap, where they had this hard sort of linen and they made a cap out of it and filled it with boiling pitch. Your hands were tied behind your back, and it was usually you were sheared, maybe with a sheep shears. And some of the commentators from the time said that just for a joke, the shearer might take a top off your ear or a piece off your nose. You know, when barbarity enters, the rules become suspended. All sorts of unthinkable things happen. But then they would bring the cap down on the head, and of course the heat of it would be extraordinary. But one of the things that was really bad about it was the juice coming down out of it, getting into your eyes. That it didn't blind, but it was extremely agony, you know.
Back in May, you see, there was protections issued to the rebels if they surrendered their pike. You know, it was the only weapon the rebel had, and if he surrendered his pike, he got a protection, a written protection. So if you had that written protection in your pocket, on anywhere, and the red coats or the cavalry brought you in, they couldn't touch you. You see, you were after surrendering your weapon, and it was more effective than any armoury. They handed in their weapons on the Saturday, but that evening, you see, the cavalry from Enniscorthy marched out and they killed some fellow around the Balloch, and the rebels were incensed. So they had handed their weapons in the day before down to Mount Norris in Comolan Park. They were incensed, so they went down to Mount Norris's and a group of them, maybe a couple of hundred, and they took their pikes back, and then they attacked an old magistrate near Ballycarney, and he was with Mount Norris the day before, you know, taking in the weapons, and that even then they killed two Redmond brothers on Ballycarney Bridge, and that's why the rebels were incensed, you know. They gave in their weapons and then they were murdered that evening.
The loyalists were murdered, cruelly murdered by these cowards. Remember that. No mercy, no mercy.
The pike was made, steel at the time for the blacksmith was very scarce, so they were using bands off of cars, bits of old scrap wherever they could get it from old gates, and they forged it and bait it and then they temper it. Yes, it was a very effective weapon. The head of the pike was 2 foot long with an 8 foot handle. There was umpteen designs, there was no fixed design, and some of them were made just out of a bit of a band of a car that's right now, and maybe a Nash shoe or a Jennet shoe. And they would forge that and sharpen it on the anvil, ready in the fire and just sharpen it. And it was the crook that would for cutting the girt. Also, if it caught the rider by the coat or the jacket, it would pull him apart or pull him off. In a 10-hour day, he could turn out, with help of course and fellas reading him, he could turn out 30 pikes in the day. Most of the pikemen were working labourers, farmers, all young men rebels in their late teens, early 20s. And when a cavalry would charge the pikemen with their weapon 10 foot long, there was an edge on it, and if he could cut the girt on the horse, the rider would be dismantled straight away. And you know, and as well as that, the cavalry, don't forget, let him with their muskets or their long guns. They only had one shot. And now you had a gunner and you had 4 or 5 people reloading. But the pikeman could move in very fast and out. It could take 2, 3, 4 minutes for a musket or a gun to be reloaded. And the pikeman is in and he have the mischief done and gone.
I'm giving him a fair chance. Hookshake, whatever. If you stay here, I promise you one thing. One thing. Up the Republicans! Shall I signal up, sir? May God forgive you all. My conscience is clear. Today, you all die. We see you on the hill.
What kind of man was General Lake? We hear that he was very tough on the Irishmen in the north. What kind of man was he like?
He was absolutely ruthless in his objectives as a military man. No mercy. One of the orders he sent out 4 days after Vinegar Hill was to a man that if the rebel army moves, attack them and take no prisoners. Right. You know, he was that kind of fellow.
The 1798 rebellion was made up of regiments. The British response was there was militia. A lot of the militia would be Irish Catholics with Protestant officers. The yeomanry would be made up of anyone who could afford a horse, so it would be somebody of a higher class, higher status. That again was made up with Irish Protestants, Irish Catholics. Again, all the leadership would be Irish Protestants. The fencible militia, who I am part of, were actually basically the equivalent of reservists who were brought from the mainland UK to augment the strength of the regular British Army, the regular Irish Army. You must remember at that time that the Irish Army, though part of the British Army, had its own establishment. In 98, there was most of the garrisons around the area were sort of surrounded by insurgents and surrounded by United Irishmen. There could be a garrison from 10 men to maybe 200 men. Once establishment had been made, once the area had been won, these places were used as prisons, used as foraging points against. Remember, the first part of it, the government was taken by surprise, and the response and how quickly areas were overrun. It was really, it took them a couple of weeks to get their forces together in one part. But once that happened, the rebellion finished really quickly?
Well, Murphy was a man of tremendous energy, for one thing. He was a sportsman. He was in his mid-40s, very agile, thick-set man in terms of build, of medium height, but agile and energetic, a man with stamina and tremendous courage and tremendous determination. I mean, he was a man you obeyed. As one of his things he did was, it's said that he turned the shoes backwards on the horse, which wasn't a non-common thing to create a decoy about your direction. And then he had a vile execution. The head, that time, I think it's true to say that the head was to be kept on a spike for public exhibition for 6 months. I would think 20,000 in the Wexford Army, between all men I'm talking about, on the town side and on the hill, between the two. 15 versus 20. 15 government, 20 of the Wexford Army. There were quite a few women on the hill, but I think that they tried hard to make sure that as many women as possible would be removed back onto Drumgold, and children would be moved back and wounded. But nevertheless, there were many women who refused to go back and wanted to fight, had to fight with their husbands. You know what I mean? And they got into all sorts of jobs like carrying stuff and I suppose that morning cooking and what have you. Yeah. And also there used to be gathering cannonball that would come in. Lake started to move around, I'd say around 3:30 or so. Johnson was at the far side, having come up from Ross. Then the town had to be defended on one side of the river, and then Vinegar Hill was to be defended on the other. And Lake left Salisbury, and he sent General Duff, who was the commander of his right wing, forward. Then Lake himself turned off, moved up along through Clonhassan Cross, right up to where the mast is on Vinegar Hill now, today. And that was the right wing of the rebel army. It might have even been a little further to the right of it. And he, of course, would have cannon guns with him, and he had cavalry with him, and he had light infantry with him. Everything to make sure that his left could not be turned by the pikemen, that they might break out and move forward to where Needham was behind him, about 2 miles away, to the north of him, to take Needham's baggage train. Because if they had got that, might well have changed the history of the whole thing.
Now Needham is a name that comes up when we hear about the retreat of the rebels often again, Needham's Gap. Why was he late? What was the delay there?
Well, essentially, there should be no mystery about it. That the real key to Needham being late is the fact that he has 400 carriages of supplies. And it's not just that they're awkward to handle on the road or anything. It's that General Lake wisely kept them well away from the pikemen, because Lake knew how formidable the Wexford pikemen were by this time. He had refused to give them battle 2 mornings before up on Mount Pleasant Hill in North Wexford. Even though he had another general cooperating with him, Loftus, he couldn't afford to do it. He was afraid to take the chance. They had become a formidable fighting force. And if there was any sense that they might get trapped on Vinegar Hill, nothing would keep them from breaking through. And he wanted to handle the battle in that sort of way, to keep Needham well away with those 400 wagons of supplies. Powder in particular was wanted by the rebels. So he kept them back, but Needham's cavalry was thrown forward and did engage and was in position around Darby's Gap and the Cross of May. And it was Roach that pushed them aside, as he came just in the nick of time as the rebels were starting to move off the hill after a fight of about 2 hours.
That's almost 2 hours.
Oh yeah, it started at 7, it was over at 9. Now it wasn't a pushover, it was a very heavy fight. There was very formidable gunfire from the rebels for, say, an hour and a half. Irish battles tend to be short and sharp. but it was quite a big affair. And I'm sure that's why he was so afraid of the pikemen's right on the Battle of Vinegar Hill, that they would get around him and either close in on him that way to get the pikemen more fully engaged. That attack, by the way, was eventually made several times by the Wicklow men on Vinegar Hill. But he was also afraid that they would move out to the wagon train, of which they seemed to be unaware, because Cloney says there was a great debate the night before on the hill whether to have a night attack, which he felt himself. Now, he wasn't there, he was at the Battle of Folks Mills all that day, and he was in Wexford town. But he said that it would have succeeded. And I think even better now that had they known about that wagon train, I think it would certainly have, it would have had to change it substantially if they were able to do it successfully and to start to use the material successfully. But it was in the retreat. They say that there were as many killed in the retreat as there were in the battle itself. But they fought as many battles after Vinegar Hill as they fought before it. Vinegar Hill was number 11, and they had fought 21 altogether. So it was a long denouement. People realised there's no point in keeping this thing going. The more we do it now, there'll be tit for tat, you know. So things began to settle down, and people got involved in the harvest. And
the great John Moore of Corunna, that most people know who this general is, he was a general at this battles here in Ireland. He said, for a man to be a Protestant or a Catholic, to be proud of that has no matter, because his decision has been made by his grandfather and his grandfather before him, so that it means nothing.
Oh, I think it planted a flag. It planted a flag for democracy and for real republican government. It also offered to subsequent generations an example. And the idea that great sacrifice had been made for a noble ideal and for Ireland. 98 was permeated with quite a strong sense of the Irish nation. You see the harp back as the emblem. You see the green colour. These were all new things. They're laying down a new basis for the nation, that people of different religions should share the nation.
From the county Wexford sweeps o'er the land like a mighty wave. We took Clamolan and Enniscorthy and Wexford starving drove out our foes. 'Twas such required. Our pikes were reeking with the crimson stream of the beaten yews. At Taberneering and Ballyellis full many a patient lay in his gore, for Father Murphy had aid come over. The green flag floated from shore to shore. Vinegar Hill, or the Pleasance Laney, our hero